Welcome to LifeSci AI, the podcast series, brought to you by Cypro and hosted by me, Nick Mahoney. This series looks to shine a light on the key developments of AI within the life science industry. Following on from the successful roundtable Cypro hosted in 2020, we aim to bring cross-collaboration between common projects and to help promote the use of AI in life sciences. I really hope you enjoy this episode.
So welcome back to LifeSci AI, the podcast series, hosted by myself, Nick Mahoney, in regards to Cypro in London. And as you can see, if you're watching on YouTube, I've migrated to my bedroom, where we're getting some lovely London sun this afternoon. This is episode 3 of the first series. And so if you've not caught up with the previous episodes, then please go and find episode 1 and 2 on your preferred streaming service. But for now, I'm delighted to be joined by the CTO of Cydar Medical, Rob Hague. Welcome, Rob.
Hi, Nick. Nice to be here.
Pleasure to have you on. Just give everyone listening and watching just an idea of who you are and what Cydar do on a top level.
So Cydar are a medical device company, and we've been around for as a company producing a device to clinicians about 6 years. The actual company was founded a few years before that. So I joined at the start of that product journey. I initially joined as a principal engineer and then moved to CTO in 2017. And yes, but so our device is it's an interesting one in that it's a medical device, but it's purely software, and it's not just software, but it's software as a service. So we provide it as a web service, but unusually we're not just a web service. We're a web service that goes right into the operating room and supports surgeons and other clinicians during image guided surgery. So so that's the kind of overview where we are, and we are we've got products in the market, and we're still growing.
Awesome. So I think the first thing to note is you guys are a software company as a medical device, and that's to say every time we mention a medical device in this episode, we are determining it as a software platform and nothing to do with the hardware side of things, and we'll delve into that in a bit more detail. But just want to touch on yourself first, Rob. You joined Cydar from Azuro, which was eventually bought by Cadence. You spent, was it 10 years there?
I think it was about 3 months shy of 10 years.
Right, cool. So you obviously not in the medical industry or healthcare or related industry really. What were the differences you found going across into healthcare and medical device?
So there's quite a few. So to start off with the what was very similar from the EDA, electronics design automation, which is the field I was in before. There's a fair few similarities. So it's you're designing for and building products for expert users. So consumer software, you obviously have to look at a wide range of people. You have to consider people just walk up and using it, and so I think it's very different challenges. Whereas if you're doing something very specialist in any field, you're working for expert users, and also it's a bigger thing where you don't have the domain knowledge that your users have, which is one challenge, and you face in both fields. So that's one thing where it's the same, and a lot of the mechanics are the same. So it's all fairly demanding software, both on the theoretical aspects of just getting it to work, understanding what it's doing, but also computationally. There's you need some significant computational power to both design circuits and to do the image guided surgery support that we do. We'll get onto. But so that's the same. So things are the same. Things that are different, I think, are the day to day. The medical industry is a lot more regulated and obvious and good reasons. So you have to work within within these regulations, and that I think does make a big difference. It sounds, when you're coming into it from the outside, it does sound like this is going to be A, very worrying and stressful, and B, it's going to kind of slow you down, and you're going to be fighting against it. And actually, coming at it, we've at Cydar, we've managed to do it in such a way that it's not too onerous. It just allows us to still develop software at a fair pace, and but within a way that complies with the regulations and allows us to get the certifications we need. So I mean, that's the most useful thing I think day to day. But on the other side, obviously the personal, that that you're kind of directly helping in these like literally life-saving operations. And it's fantastic feeling to go in and realize, to kind of see a dashboard. Okay, someone's connected. I know that's actually someone who is there's a medical sort of clinical team there, and they are operating somebody, and you're making a real impact on that procedure. And you can very directly see the benefits you're providing to people, which I think that's a fantastic upside. And that's I think one of the big differences. And obviously also all kinds of products are very important and do very valuable jobs. But being able to work on a medical device for me is fantastic. And it's constantly reminding you that what you're doing is making a big difference, but also it keeps you in mind that you can't mess about. you need to do it properly. Exactly. Which is so that I think is the biggest difference in terms of how you approach the work. And also it makes it a very rewarding field to be in.
Did you ever think that you would go into medical device? Was there anything before, I don't know how you joined Cydar, if you were approached by them or you found them? Was it something on your radar at all, or?
It's not something I particularly considered as a very explicit, this is the direction I want to go. What happens, we got to the point where, as you say, Azuro, which is I joined when it was a small startup, kind of grew to a sort of medium-sized company, and then was bought by Cadence, which is a very large company. I tried working in a large company environment for a few years, but then decided I'd rather go back to a smaller company. So I started looking around for startups in the kind of Cambridge area, and this kind of saw a few companies, but Cydar, I thought, oh, that sounds interesting, I'll go and talk to them. At that point, it was Tom and Graham, the co-founders, and Andreas, who's one of Graham's researchers, that's KCL. So there was the three of them basically, and went to kind of interview and talked about it. And at that point, it was very interesting technology, but it wasn't a product, and they were trying to get people at that to take the technology and actually do all the kind of the extra bits around that core technology that Graham had developed, and then with Tom and Andreas kind of turned into a proof of concept version. We basically take the steps to take that and turn it into a product that could be delivered to clinicians.
So it was more the tech that was interesting, and then the secondary came that actually what you're working on makes a massive impact and a massive difference.
Exactly. I mean, it's a kind of a sweet spot really in Cydar and companies like us. We've got kind of both things going for us. It's very interesting technology, but it's also in a very interesting field and very interesting application.
Yes, that's it's interesting. I think there's more, as you say, more medical devices, software companies grow. People like yourself coming across into the industry will happen more and more. You mentioned that you joined as a principal engineer and now CTO. So it'd be interesting to know maybe what challenges you found going into. I mean, it was your first CTO role, right? So
exactly. Yes.
What kind of challenges did you find moving into that position?
So that's interesting because you kind of think back, and it's a lot of times when you kind of think back on your kind of career development, it's it's sort of like a gradual process, and it kind of moves. So there's no kind of big change. It just kind of evolves as you go on. But in this case, it was there was a definite a kind of definite discontinuity. So basically, the background was John, the previous CTO, moved on. He decided to go and pursue other projects, and he's now he co-founded a company of his own. So when he left, Tom Graham approached me and said, "Okay, would you like to step up and be CTO?" And it was kind of in my head. It was possibly the next step on my career. It's like, okay, well, that's probably the next place I'd like to go. But I wasn't thinking of doing it at that point. So it kind of it's definitely a move on to make. But it came as a bit of a surprise with the timing.
Yeah.
So but I'm very happy to have the opportunity, and said yes. And kind of in some ways it wasn't a big kind of wrench, because I was still the same company, still knew the team, and it was already being in some kind of day-to-day sort of like team leadership as part of my role as principal engineer. But the kind of CTO part was the bit I had to learn, and that's and I think the big difference is that I've kind of had to adjust to is doing less of kind of the day-to-day work on the kind of on the ground, actually evolving the products. I do still try and do some of that, but it's a big difference in that as principal engineer, it is still largely the engineer part is still a big factor.
Yeah.
Whereas as CTO, I get a lot less opportunity to do that, which is a shame in a lot of ways, because that's something I really enjoy doing. I still see myself as a developer, but in terms of actually day-to-day work, I don't get the chance to do that, and it's and I've kind of had to adjust my mindset in that the way I'm developing software now isn't to go and basically open up Emacs and write some code. It's to actually facilitate the rest of the team. To
you develop the vehicle for the software development almost. So it's developing the software via somebody else. That's the mindset shift.
Precisely. So I think I think this is true. Just in general, as you kind of go up into leadership roles, then you become more of a facilitator to actually make sure that other people can do their jobs, rather than doing things directly. Now, the other thing that changed is that kind of the scope of the role is a bit different. So when as a principal engineer, I was almost entirely focused on just like the technical aspects of the product. With CTO, that's kind of widened to obviously there's an aspect of things like the strategic aspects of just with all the kind of C-level roles. But the other one that is peculiar to medical devices is the regulatory aspect. Which turns out to be a big part of the role. And this is so we kind of work with consultants and we have people on staff to do a lot of the kind of detailed regulatory work, but it all kind of falls on the big part of it is particularly the medical device regulation side kind of thing. So that falls sort of in my area. I just kind of overseeing that and making sure, in particular, our processes are up to scratch, and everything is developed in accord, so that we can, as we're in the process of doing now, we go to get a CE mark or a 510K from the FDA or whatever certification you need, and we can provide the evidence that this has been developed, this product is developed and maintained in accordance with the relevant standards, and to we need to be able to do that while also developing the software. So this kind of comes back to what we were saying about facilitating other people. developing the software. Part of that is kind of creating the process in which it happens, and providing the kind of the platform on which people can work.
Yeah, so almost a facilitator in chief, more rather than the chief technical officer, almost. you could call it.
So sometimes feels like that, yeah.
Yeah. So talk about Cydar then, and the actual product and the AI behind it. Just explain the use case and the need, where it came from, and the kind of AI that's being used to solve this need.
Okay, yeah. So the so as I said, it's a the product is Cydar EV, and that's a software medical device. The EV stands for endovascular, which is a type of surgery. So take a step back and talk about the kind of the medical condition that they're addressing. What a core one for us is abdominal aortic aneurysms, or AAA. So this is where your blood vessel's weakened and it swells, and if it's left untreated, it can burst, and that can be, in the case of an aortic aneurysm, that can be fatal. So, how do you address this? Now, the traditional ways you'd have done this is you actually have open surgery. So, general anaesthetic, they make a fairly large incision, and they basically they cut open the diseased blood vessel and sew in a graft. So it is a tube of impermeable fabric. So they sew that in to bridge the weakened part of the blood vessel, sew you back up again, and then you spend quite a long time, of weeks, in hospital recovering. So it's a very major procedure. A more modern alternative that is increasingly popular is endovascular surgery, where instead of opening you up in the just opening your abdomen from going in directly, they will put an incision in your leg, or your upper chest, and they will insert a device on a sort of compressed down like an umbrella. They'll feed that in through the blood vessels till it gets to the location you need to go. Then remove the sheath. It unfurls like an umbrella. And the graft here it's a stent graft, so it has a springy frame on it as well.
Right.
So you remove the sheath, it springs out, and it has little hooks, so it will hook into the blood vessel above and below the weakened area. It does exactly the same job when it's there, which is it bridges the disease, so it takes the pressure off, allows the aneurysm to heal, and it means that your blood's not going into that aneurysm and going to increase the pressure to burst it. But the way it's done is far less invasive, far less impact to the patient, and can be done on local anaesthetic. Which that's a bit often
so many advantages for that.
Exactly,
for that
yeah. But the problem with it, certainly as far as the clinician usually the surgeon performing the operation, the disadvantage as far as they're concerned is they can't see what they're doing, because obviously you can't put a camera inside a blood vessel because it's full of blood. So if you're doing surgery inside a bowel, say that there's a space there. So an optical camera with a light on the end, you can see where you're going. Doesn't work in blood vessels. So these procedures run under X-ray guidance.
Right.
So they have what's called fluoroscopy, which is basically just live X-rays. So they're doing not very high frame rate video, and only when there's something interesting to see. Because obviously X-ray dose is a big factor. You can't just keep filming like you can with an optical camera, because you're beaming X-rays into people. So but you have there's a pedal, and the clinician can put their foot down and take a 15 frame a second sort of video with X-rays, which is great. They can see the instruments, which are made of or have metal in them. They see that, and wires, things like that. They can see those great. They see bones, obviously, on X-ray. What you can't distinguish between is blood vessel and the tissue around it, because it's all basically the same density as far as X-ray is concerned. So the procedure's fantastic in terms of it's minimally invasive and far better recovery times. But the problem is, these grafts have to be placed fairly precisely. So there is a way to get around this. So you can inject contrast medium into the blood vessels, and then take a rapid series of high dose X-rays, which gives you an angiogram. Problem with that is, to rapid series of high dose X-rays, that is a significant increase in your X-ray dose for the procedure.
Yeah.
And B, you have the contrast medium that you inject is toxic to the kidneys. So if you use too much of that, you can have side effects with a reduction in or loss of kidney function. So you obviously need to minimise that, especially for some patients with existing kidney problems.
Kidney problems, yeah.
So both of those you want to avoid. So this is where Cydar comes in. So what we do is we take the image, the X-ray image that's already been taken.
Yeah.
We perform some computer vision on it, which recognises where the vertebra are, vertebra in the spine. So we're operating in the abdomen. Obviously, you have the lower spine. Those vertebrae, which are turns out quite distinct, both across patients and with each other. So the various lumbar vertebrae, they are fairly easy to distinguish. Looking at them, certainly as you are as a non-medical professional, look at them, it's just vertebrae, but they are distinct enough that we can do computer vision on them to determine not only which vertebrae it is, but its fairly precise position orientation.
Right.
So we do that, and this is the technology that Graham Penny, the co-founder, had developed. He's an imaging scientist who's at KCL.
KCL, yeah.
Yeah. He's so the technology he developed was basically take these images of vertebra and compare them to CT scans, because before this procedure, in order to plan it, the patient has a CT scan. So what we can do is we can match the CT scan to the image, and we can work out the transformation you need to render that CT scan on top of the image. And we can take from the CT scan, because that has the blood vessel distinguished in it. So you can take the blood vessel from the CT scan and overlay it onto the live fluoroscopy in a very, very accurate way. So there are other techniques to do this operation. They tend to be rely on mechanical tracking. But the image-based tracking, it's far more accurate than that in the sort of testing we've done. And we've had sort of third-party clinical studies have done this, have shown this as well. It's a very accurate way of doing it, but also you're actually tracking the patient rather than the table. Because if you have a mechanical system that's tracking the relative position of the table and the X-ray set, those are pretty accurate for that. But unfortunately, one of the things we found is the patient moves relative to the table quite, because as you're doing this operation, even if you don't do anything like bump into the table, it's just pushing these devices, some of which are quite thick, sort of stiff devices, pushing these in and out of the patient, that kind of moves them around. And you get quite a significant amount of patient movement. Because
so it becomes inaccurate.
Exactly, it starts to drift, and they have to re-register. Whereas because we're looking at the image every time, and it's the image of the patient rather than anything else. We are kind of that doesn't
really move. So you've got higher accuracy because you've got a non-moving target almost.
Exactly. Well, so we're kind of moving with the target in that. You can register on the patient, and register very accurately on them as well. Now, of course, you say they don't. One of the things about people, rather, if you're X-raying a mummy in a sarcophagus, for example, they're not going to move. If you're X-raying an actual living human being, especially one where you are changing, basically you're operating on them, there is movement there. So this is one of the things we've had to account for. Firstly, there's a couple of things. And one, the pose of the person in the CT scanner is significantly different to the pose of the person when they're on the table, largely because you can do these procedures under local anaesthetic, but more often than not, they are done under general. And in that case, the person they're flat on the back and all the muscles are completely relaxed. Whereas if you're on the CT scanner, you are often they'll get people to put their hands above their heads,
right,
and their back will be arched. And so it's going to be, and they're conscious, so they have their muscle tone. So they have, there's a kind of significant difference in between the CT scan and the scan.
On that difference then, does your AI model, does that take care of that difference? Is that something that's really conscious for it? Do you have to facilitate that?
So this is the thing. So the original one didn't. So the original one that
Right.
we started with when we launched the device in 2015, that it didn't. So for the and if what you're doing is taking a single registration of to be a single position to say, okay, here's the blood vessel at this point in time.
Yeah.
It doesn't actually make a huge amount of difference.
Right.
Especially so how it works is we are very accurate on the vertebrae we've matched on.
Yeah.
And then obviously if things have bent, then as you move away from that vertebra, the accuracy is going to decrease. However, we pick the vertebra that we base the position on to be the one that's closest to the central skin, which is where the cushion is looking.
Right.
So we measure this effect, and in practice, it doesn't make a lot of difference for just positioning.
Yeah.
It does come in. So it's more accurate if you can model it, but it comes into its own when you're trying to do more with that data, which I'll get onto in a second.
Yeah.
So one of the things we added a couple of years ago was tracking of this sort of what we call intervertebral movement. So the change of the posture of the spine.
Yeah.
In between. It's what we call registration. So it's the act of taking a single image and working out the corresponding position. So what we did is we we build, and it's basically it's an AI model. It's a machine learning model that's building up a statistical model of how the spine is varied based on the observations it's taking. So it interprets each registration as a new observation. It says, okay, given that I've seen this this vertebra here, and so when I see that vertebra there and that vertebra, there's an angle between them.
Yeah.
And I know that I'm viewing this from a certain position. So you've got it has to be quite an involved process to actually build this model up. But what we're doing is we're building a model of the pose of the spine,
Right.
and it's increasingly accurate as you take more images. And an important factor of this is the user doesn't need to do anything. They don't need to go, okay, we're going to take an APV and a lateral view and calculate the spine position, or do anything in particular. This is just kind of gradually, this model is gradually refined as the case goes on.
Yeah. So effectively, as the user, would be the clinician, they just see the final image in front of them, so they can work off that.
Yeah.
So I just want to touch on that actually, though, on that final image, because that's a 3D image, right?
Yeah.
So how do you look at visualization? That's something that we Cypro, we talk to a lot of different companies now that are using visualization for different areas, be it 3D printing, for like pre-surgery planning of anatomies, or for 3D diagnostics. So you're using it for guided surgery. So what do you use for visualization? What the major challenges do you find in your workflow?
So that's a good question. This is something we kind of encountered early on, and we've got when we when I joined in 2014, kind of got an initial version of this, and the problem is you've got two fairly complicated images. You've got the X-ray image, which is it's noisy, so it kind of looks complicated at a glance.
Yeah.
But more importantly, even once you kind of factor that, you account for that, there's a lot of information. It's not just there's a lot of information. It's a lot of very clinically relevant information in terms of where things are, and where the vein anatomy are, where the devices are. And then in addition to that, you've got this fairly detailed 3D model, again, which it's got it's kind of clinical relevant, and you need to know where the various bits of the blood vessel are.
Yeah.
So you've got these two things, and you want to show them basically one on top of the other. And unfortunately, the clinical interesting bits are in the same place, because that's the bit you're operating on. So there's you need to figure out a way to do this. The first attempt was kind of making it semi-transparent, and that turns out to be almost the worst of both worlds, in
Right.
that you can't see the detailed philosophy underneath, and you also can't get a good picture of the a good picture of the 3D those 3D features. So the next thing was, it was kind of a 3D model that faded in and out, either under manual control. So you got a slide that said, okay, I want to see more of the fluoroscopy or more of the 3D model.
Yeah.
And then later on, there was another variant of that where it would kind of like pulse almost. So it would kind of alternate between being mostly transparent and mostly opaque.
Right.
So that kind of does achieve a lot of the goals, but that's quite distracting, and it's still a suboptimal information in both cases. So
Both areas, yeah.
So what we've ended up with, and we went through a few iterations on the way to this, but what we ended up with was a model where you have the 3D model on one side of the screen, just purely on it with no background, and then an outline of it on top of the fluoroscopy.
Right.
So
and that outlines a 2D image, obviously. So you have one 3D with no background, and then you have a 2D next to it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
So obviously under the covers, because we're doing this in real time. So they're actually both 3D models, just rendered in different ways. So in fact, it's exactly the same 3D model from the same pose, so that you can look across from one to the other.
Yeah.
And you can actually spot important features. So on the one of the things that people are often looking for is you've got the aorta. The key things are the aorta coming down, it branches at the bottom, and then you've got the renal arteries going to the kidneys, going to the left and right. In addition to that, there are sort of the visceral vessels going to kind of the bowel and deliver these to kind of your visceral organs, going forwards from the aorta. So, and those, obviously, if you just drew a silhouette, you'd miss those entirely. So one of the things we had to practice, and we actually worked with the graphics programmer who did the graphics for Monument Valley, the iPhone game. So we could, he was a consultant with us on the kind of exploring some of the options for this, and the option we came on was basically we've done an outline, but we can make sure that we get all the 3D features. So rather than you could obviously just do a silhouette and edge detect it, and you get an outline, but it was missing 3D information. Whereas what we've got is, because we're doing a slightly more sophisticated rendering from the 3D model to the outline directly, rather than going via a silhouette.
Yeah,
we do render vessels that come out forward, and it took we had a few versions of that where you have problems like, for example, thin lines would disappear, or things would be too thick, or you get strange artifacts where it would be things would look either thicker or thinner than they
actually were.
And so it took us a little while to actually get a sort of solid version of that, which would work in kind of all the cases, because it's very easy to get something which works on your test data. You go, okay, that's fine. You reset the model of it, that's fine. And then you throw a bunch of other models out on it with different features, and you go, oh no, okay, suddenly it looks like those two things are joined up when they're not, or that line's too thin, that's too thick. If you have something at this very extreme angle, suddenly it looks rubbish. So that was a very involved process. But the one we've got now, I think, is it's a very good combination of looking reasonable for all the models we see, but also providing a very useful level of information without obscuring the fluoroscopy.
I think it's always, whenever I've spoken to people about visualization, it's that tricky balance between creating a usable user experience, but also making sure that all the necessary information on a scientific point of view is delivered in that accurately as well. And marrying the two is always challenging.
Absolutely.
But from the start, Cydar, you guys, as you said, were always the software company working in medical devices. And you noted on it at the start in regards to working within regulated environments and FDA approval. And before the FDA changed the medical device work in 2017, I think it was, you were saying, in the first iterations of your product, you were working with guidance from 1997.
Yes, that's right. There's a memo from the FDA from 1997, which was the clearance we get in the FDA is what's called a 510K.
Yeah.
Basically, the FDA check that what you've got is reasonable. It's been developed under a quality management system, various other things, and they say, okay, no, you're okay to put that on the market. They're not, they're not saying, no, this is great. So it's not an approval. What it is a kind of clearance to put it on the market.
Yeah.
So this is what typically a lot of devices which are so because a lot of software devices will be under, but the system is designed for all kinds of medical devices, so everything from tongue depressors and syringes up to X-ray sets.
Yeah.
So so the thing we found was a lot of it is a recurring theme, not just for the FDA, but with a lot of regulators and regulation, is you're reading this thing and you have to kind of translate in your head. So yeah, an example recently is okay. So what does preservation mean? So obviously in if you've got take a topical example, a vaccine, then you need to specify that this needs to be kept at this temperature and transported in this way, and not shaken about or exposed to direct light or whatever. So okay, so what does preservation mean in
software?
The software. Is it applying patches? Is that so some cases you go, well, okay, that's just not relevant. Okay, does it incorporate substances of human origin? Pretty sure not. Whereas other things like preservation, for example, you can make an argument to say, there is an equivalent step for software. It's not obviously keeping it at a particular temperature, but it's making sure that maybe part of it is making sure that the server it's running on is kept within a certain temperature range. Doesn't overheat and fail. So that you have to kind of adapt a lot of this language. And the FDA 1997 memo was a particularly notable case of that, because there's this enormous flowchart where you go through and you have to select where basically you answer a bunch of questions whether you need to submit a new 510K if there's been a significant change. So for example, has the labeling changed? That's a new 510K. So a lot of these questions are completely irrelevant. Like, for example, has the sterilization procedure changed? That doesn't apply. Has the type of radiation you're using changed? Don't use radiation. Software device. So there's also there's this big stream of relevant questions almost for a software device. You have to kind of be very careful and pick out the ones, because obviously there are some of them which are absolutely relevant. You need to be careful to make sure you pay attention to those ones and consider them properly. But you had to kind of translate it from this thing, which then I especially noticed they hadn't even thought of a purely software medical device. So that changed. So in 2017, they finally reissued a replacement memo for this. And that one, it says, okay, if you're there's I think it's actually a separate memo for software medical devices that refers to that one, and that has its own flow chart, which has got I think it's 5 questions on it, and it's very specifically designed for software products. So for example, do you need new 510K? So is this a security patch or a bug fix? Yes, don't need a new 510K, because they very consciously thought about it this time round. And by 2017, they were thinking of software as a medical device, and also more software in medical devices more generally. But so is it a bug fix or a security patch? They want that to go out, so they don't want you to wait your 90 days for the FDA to come back. So
if you're doing a patch, they want you to send that straight away rather than waiting for the FDA
so
to come back.
if it's purely to fix a security issue, or to fix it, I think the phrase is return it to its original specification,
right?
Fix a bug. So you can't use that as a way to sneak in new features, but there are then further questions which say, okay, if it doesn't come under that, how do you determine this change is significant? And those are very definitely geared towards software changes and risk in mind. And we're seeing this increasingly across regulators, is they are paying more attention to software, and the systems of regulation are being better, so more directly adapted to software. So it's and obviously it absolutely, and in AI as well is another area where people are looking at it sort of specifically, and how to have questions like how do you regulate AI devices, and in particular things like so deep learning products. I mean, if you've got a black box deep learning device, how do you validate that? How do you how do you verify what it's doing?
I think that's a very interesting question to leave it on, with AI regulation, and how do you validate that black box for deep learning methods. And I think the end there about the FDA approval is it's obviously going in one direction. We touched on it on the previous episode with Mark Goldfinger, and I think it will be a common theme moving through, and it'd be actually something interesting for us all to document the different changes as we develop through in the next 24, 36 months, as people go on. But I personally found that absolutely fascinating, Rob, as a conversation. Thank you very much. And I hope people listening and watching took some advice, and maybe the common challenges that Rob shared with that you can use in your projects now or moving forward in the future. But if you haven't looked at the previous episodes, please go back and have a listen or watch of those. But as ever, thank you. As I said, thank you very much, Rob. Really appreciate that. Hope you had fun as well.
Yes, it's been a pleasure.
Awesome. But look, thank you very much, and we'll see you on the next episode, guys. Thank you.
Thanks.
That finishes this episode for LifeSci AI, the podcast series. I hope you got as much enjoyment out of that as I did. Join myself again in a couple of weeks, where I'll be shining yet another light on a new area of AI within life sciences. In the meantime, follow Cypro on social media to hear about the latest updates on the series, but also on the roundtables and other work we do day to day. Please also like, share, tell a friend, and comment on this podcast so that we can all promote the use of AI in life sciences together. Thanks for listening.